All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Peggy Kuiper. I'm the Director of Sport and Rec Business here, Recreation Business at UAF, and I'm here today with Mason, Anastasia, and Danielle. Danielle is going to be hosting the speaker series today, so I will let Danielle do the intros here and get rolling. So thank you to everybody for being here, and thank you to Mason and Anastasia for being willing to share your expertise with us today.
Cool. Thanks, Peggy. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle. This is our fourth and last speaker series this semester. So thanks for being here for that. I'm an instructor with the Business, Sport, and Recreation program here at UAF as well. And I'm really excited for our panel today with Anastasia and Mason. And I'm ready to get started. But I wanted to do a few housekeeping rules just because we're on Zoom, and just a quick reminder for everyone, please keep your microphones on mute and utilize the chat box if you have any questions, and we will have a time if you have a question at the end of the Zoom call to ask them. So we'll get there and I will let y'all know when that happens. And I'm just going to throw it over and let our panelists introduce themselves. So maybe just a brief background, who you are, where you work for. Our panel today is on product development. So maybe talking about your specific product or products if you want, and an overview of your path of how you got to what you're doing now. So Anastasia, would you like to start?
I'd love to. Thanks for having me, Danielle. My name is Anastasia Allison, and I am the founder of a company called Kula Cloth. And Kula Cloth, we make one very unique product. It is an antimicrobial pee cloth for anybody who squats when they pee. And I came up with the idea for this product back in 2016. And the sort of very brief backstory on the product is that I'm a former park ranger. I'm a backpacking instructor, and I have taught backpacking primarily to women for about a decade. And I was on a backpacking trip and frustrated by how much toilet paper I was finding discarded everywhere. And I went home from one of my trips and I did a Google search for leave no trace toilet paper options. And I found this article talking about how you could use a bandana or a scrap of fabric as a pee cloth. And I thought, that is the most disgusting idea I have ever heard in my life. Who would do that? But I was a backpacking instructor, and so I decided I'm going to just try it. And turns out I loved it. A few years later, I was on my own backpacking trip, and as a joke, I was taking photographs of my pea cloth in a dramatic, beautiful location in Wyoming to send to a friend. I don't know what that says about me as a friend, but I thought it was funny. And as I was doing this, I remember thinking to myself, I had this like spark just come into my mind, and it said, why isn't that a real piece of gear? Like, if that was designed to be a real piece of gear and it felt more intentional, would people be less squeamish about the idea of using a pea cloth in the backcountry? And could that sort of bring up a conversation around leave no trace options for people and make people more comfortable going outside? And I initially got scared away from the idea of designing a product because I didn't know how to sew, I didn't know how to do anything, and eventually sort of came back to it uh, through a sort of series of serendipitous events. And now Kula Cloth is coming up on 4 years old, maybe. It's sold by REI, and it's a product I started making in my guest bedroom. So that's the very brief history of Kula Cloth. I'm now in the process of designing a pair of underwear for hiking. So never thought I'd be doing this, but it's been a really exciting journey.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that backstory, and I'm excited to hear more. And when I was thinking about who, I wanted to ask for this speaker series, I was like, what are pieces of gear that I like to use that are really unique? And I immediately thought of the Kula Cloth because I think it's so cool. And I take it with me everywhere. So on trips. So thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, Mason, you want to go ahead and do an intro?
Yeah. So I'm Mason Strail. I've primarily done a lot of contract work, going back, probably 5 to 7 years. And before what I'm doing now, I did photography. I've moved into a position at a small company called Zenbivy. And while I am their marketing manager, a lot of what we do, because we're such a small company, is it's all kind of hands-on feedback on the product. And so over the 4 or 5 years that I've been, kind of with Zenbivy in some sort of regard, I have, put in a lot of input into different products. I've tested a ton of different stuff since then. And, that's really something that I have recognized that I really like doing, is just really getting into the details of it, how things work, why things work, any way that we can make it better. And so I've been working on that. As I said, we're a small company, and so kind of everybody has their hands in everything. So I actually work with our factories. We have a factory in Vietnam and Thailand, and so I've really gotten to see the full process of how something goes from a concept. It's designed, it's drawn out, all the revisions that we have all our prototypes coming back and forth between the factories, and so I've really gotten a chance to see that process. And then more recently, I've started my own company making bags. I run Arete Designs, which is very, very new, but it's kind of taking a lot of that, look into that design side of things that I really liked, while working at Zenbivy, and I'm still working at Zenbivy in that same capacity, and kind of applying it to something else that I love. I found that, that there's not really a product that serves my need. And so I'm trying to build some things that work better, are durable, they're going to last, and can kind of, hopefully solve some other people's problems as well. I feel like a lot of the experience that I have puts me in, probably a small, section of users. And so, I'm trying to design things for photographers, but I'm also trying to design things for, people who, are just going to coffee shops and, running errands, or, riding around on their bikes. And so I'm trying to take all this different experience from, my outdoor experience and my photography experience and product design experience, and kind of try and solve some solutions for somebody, including me. And, so that's kind of been where that project has come from. And I think that's a pretty good intro about me.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. And Zenbivy was another one of those things that I thought of like, this is a very unique product.
It's a very unique product.
Awesome. And that kind of goes into our next question. Anastasia, you already kind of gave us a description of your product. But can we go deeper into what the process of developing it was like? And maybe Mason, we can start with you with giving a description of what Zenbivy is and how it's different and what you're doing there. And then we'll move over to Anastasia.
Perfect. Yeah, so I've actually been somewhat involved with Zenbivy since we started. When they started Zenbivy and Kula Cloth are actually similar. They're similar. We started about 5 years ago. So I've really gotten to see the product kind of from its start when it was introduced. And, at the time it was a relatively novel idea. Basically what it is it's a new take on the sleeping bag. The owner, Mike Glavin, he ran several of the bigger outdoor companies. He ran MSR for a good while, and then he moved to Mountainsmith, and he eventually ended up at Arete Designs, and he ran Arete Designs for a few years. And one of the products he invented was the Backcountry Bed, which is basically trying to free the constriction that people usually feel in a standard sleeping bag. You know, you get in there, you zip yourself all the way up, you have your little hood and you're kind of tucked in there, and you know, you don't really have a lot of space to move around, which is not very natural in how we sleep. You know, if you sleep in your bed at home, you're going to be tossing and turning, kind of shifting side to side. You know, you have more flexibility. You can pull the covers off, you know, if you get a little warm, you know. And so he wanted to take that idea and, you know, make the backcountry experience a lot more comfortable. Because one of the things that he found is that there are a lot of people who don't feel like the outdoors is accessible to them because they've had a bad experience in the outdoors, or they can't sleep outdoors. And so one of the main, you know, kind of guiding pieces for starting Zenbivy was he wanted to enable these people to give it a second chance and to, you know, allow people to sleep more comfortably. So the product itself is a quilt, and then there's a sheet that goes on the sleeping pad, you know, so it's built pretty similar to your bed at home. You have a mattress, a sheet, and a quilt. They all kind of clip together in a certain way. You know, you can really button it up and, you know, kind of tuck everything in if it's cold out, or you can, you know, kind of, you know, just throw the quilt on top and, you know, really have a, you know, a comfortable experience that way. And we have gotten a lot of feedback from, you know, especially people who, we've had a lot of feedback from veterans who feel claustrophobic in sleeping bags. And this is one way that they've been able to get, you know, get back outdoors, because in a lot of ways that's been prohibitive to them. And then we've also tried to be just really inclusive as well. So we probably offer the biggest range of sizes in sleep systems out of any company out there. You know, and so a lot of where we're based is just trying to get people back outdoors if they had a bad experience, or invite more people out. You know, because if you go backpacking or camping, that's a pretty central part of the whole thing, is, you know, making sure you get a good night's sleep. So that's, you know, in a nutshell, what we do and what we've continued to do. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you, Mason. And I can speak to the comfortability of the Zenbivy. But cool, thanks. Anastasia, could you talk about what the process of developing a product, like you said, at first you're a little scared of like making a whole new product. What was that process like for you, and how did you do it?
Yeah, so I did not know how to sew. I had zero experience in the textile industry whatsoever. So I guess the takeaway from that is, if you have an idea for something and you don't know anything about that thing, don't let that be a limiting factor, because somebody out there knows something and can help you. And I think that's the most important part of being an entrepreneur, is being resourceful and making phone calls. I The first time I had the idea for Kula cloth, I immediately thought of all the things that I didn't know how to do, and I just stopped. I got scared and decided not to do it. And then, to make a long story short, I almost died, realized I didn't have anything to be afraid of anymore. And like, what was I so afraid of? Like starting a pea cloth company. And I decided, you know, I don't know how to sew, but I can make a phone call. And there's people out there who do know how to sew. And so I started making phone calls. I explained what I wanted to do. I didn't know what type of fabric I wanted to use, but I started calling textile mills, right? Like, nobody can stop you from doing that. I started calling them, and they answered me, and they answered my questions. And it's like, the more and more that you can move forward without needing to know all the answers, you begin to realize that the answers come and find you along the way. Like, your job as the entrepreneur with the idea is just to maintain the belief that your idea is possible. That's it. And you just walk forward being like, I have no clue how to do this, but it's possible. And the right ideas and the right answers and the right people magically show up. So I'm going to show you all one of the very first Kula cloths that I ever made. And this is what it looked like. I went to, so a friend loaned me a serger. Again, I had never sewed in my life. A friend loaned me a serger sewing machine, and I went to this fabric store in Seattle and I just bought a ton of fabric. And of course, immediately the serger jammed. And if you've ever like had to rethread a serger, it's like a complete nightmare. But I figured it out. And at first, this one actually looks pretty good, but you could tell it's not even really a square because I couldn't sew at all. But I want to show you that, this is a first draft that I made. And this is a Kula cloth that we haven't released yet, but one that's coming in the next couple months. And it's this beautiful like work of art. And if you just saw this today, like sitting on a shelf, you'd be like, wow, like that product just appeared out of the air. And whoever made that, like, totally had their stuff together. And I want you to know that I absolutely did not have my stuff together. And I was sitting in my guest bedroom sewing things that looked like this for a very long time. And so I sewed these squares over and over again until it got to the point where I wasn't so embarrassed with the shape of my square. And I found a bunch of friends who were willing to test it for me. And so I started giving them out to people that I knew who hiked. And people started telling me what they liked and didn't like about it. And I started testing different fabrics and learning new things about what could happen with fabric. So if you can see, this is actually just two pieces of fabric sewed together, almost like a pillow. But the real Kula cloth that we ended up sort of deciding on, it has this waterproof side that's actually laminated with heat to the absorbent side. So there's actually no pillowing in between those, but it's still two pieces of fabric. Now, I did not know that that was a thing at all, or that you could even do that. But over time, you just begin to learn new new terminology, and you start to describe what you want, and the people that are in that industry know what is available to you, and a lot of times they're the ones sort of filling in the gaps that somebody like me did not have any knowledge of whatsoever. And so I would say that I had people testing these sort of hideous kulas for a few months. And I designed this strap using a piece of paper that I cut to the size of the strap just to figure out like the exact size. Um, I sourced reflective thread over here on the side because I wanted you to be able to find the Kula cloth at night with your headlamp. I didn't know that that even existed, and everybody told me, no, there's no such thing as reflective thread. You have to use a heat transfer. And I didn't want to use a heat transfer because I was like, that's going to come off in the laundry. Um, and I ended up, Google is your friend. If you want to get into entrepreneurship, your new best friend is Google, because you can start Googling things like reflective thread, and then through that process, you're going to go down some rabbit holes and discover different words and terminology you don't know. And then you Google that, and then you Google that. And eventually you discover a company that makes this retro reflective thread, and you become their only customer who purchases that thread. So that was sort of the process. I also, didn't know how to print on fabric. Couldn't have told you how to print on fabric whatsoever. I didn't know what the term sublimation meant. Had no idea. But as I was talking to different factories, I sort of began to learn this terminology. And that's another thing. Mason was talking about working with different factories in Vietnam. I did not even know, I had no experience in the outdoor industry whatsoever. I mean, other than teaching backpacking and being a park ranger, but like as far as actual gear, no clue. So one day I sat down and I did a Google search for how do I find a place that makes stuff for me? And that was literally what I Googled. And eventually I came across this term, cut and sew facility, or cut and sew, contract cut and sew. And I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. And so I found a bunch of cut and sew places and I started calling them and saying, hey, would you do this product? And believe it or not, they talked to me, and which I hear now is actually surprising. But don't, that's the thing. When you have no experience and there's no rules and no preconceived notions about like, these people aren't going to talk to me, then you're just going in there with this like beautiful obliviousness. And you're so excited about what you're doing that all the people on the other end of the phone can sense is your excitement. And the people who make Kula cloths, I now work with two factories, have worked with two factories now for 4 years. They're all like family. They've probably made, oh my gosh, in upwards of over 100,000, if not more, Kula cloths since I got started. Probably way more than that, actually, maybe 200,000 at this point. I truthfully lost track. And I started out, my very first order at a factory was 350 Kulas. So that was sort of the process. And I think the best piece of advice that I have is don't listen to any rules that anybody tells you about how or what is possible. If you have an idea and believe it's possible, just keep moving forward, and the right people are going to find you, and you're going to find them, and the answers will show up. And the idea that you need to be an expert in something, I think, is completely false. And I hope that I can be proof of that for people, that they can say, like, oh, Anastasia literally had no clue what she's doing, and she did this thing. And that's not to say it wasn't a lot of hard work on my part, but it's been really fun and a joyful process the whole way through. And I hope that it is for anybody else who embarks on this journey.
Cool. Thank you so much for that background, Anastasia. Okay, Mason, let's go over to you, and maybe you could talk about the process and what it was like for Zenbivy.
Yeah, so as I said, our main core product was already developed by the time that I kind of came into a position that I had any say on anything. But that being said, we've done a lot since then. We've introduced a lighter weight model. Our original model was, kind of a car camping, go to the state park type sleeping bag. It was a bit heavier. And so the next thing we wanted to do was set about, finding a way that we could take the same idea and bring it to, hardcore athletes or people who are looking for a performance product. And so in doing that, it was kind of what Anastasia was saying, you really just kind of explore the different options. I didn't know that a good alternative to zippers is we have these little clips. So you have a little loop of like thread or something. It's not thread, it's like a paracord, and you can loop it through. And so in that, we found a really good way to improve the product and cut a lot of weight, because zippers are extremely heavy, and so a lot of it was just kind of going through the entire product, taking, one piece of it and just really focusing in on that, and, just thinking, how can we make this specific piece better? Yeah, Danielle's got one right there. And so we did that for the entire product. Basically, we found lighter weight fabrics. So we went from, we went from a heavier fabric to a lighter fabric. We got lighter down, and then we were able to swap the zippers for the clips. And then we also just made a lot of changes to the shape of it, which parts were insulated or not. And so the entire process was just kind of taking a look at one specific feature of it and kind of trying to move it in the direction we wanted. And again, throughout this entire process, we were, discussing this with, we basically have a cut and sew room, prototyping room at our factory. And so we were able to, give them feedback. They would send us a new piece. We would test it, and that kind of became my job. Is I spend a lot of time outdoors. So I would just always end up with some random product that I didn't really know if it would work all the way, but, I'd have to make it through the night in it. And, then I'd kind of bring that back and we just do that process over and over again until we felt like we had something that was, a real step in a better direction. And then, so then after that, we would launch, we launched that new product. It ended up becoming a better selling product than our original product. For a lot of those same reasons, is that we took our original product that largely hasn't changed, even up until now. And then we just looked at all these different ways we could make it better. So that's kind of been what the product development's been on that specific piece of it. Another piece that we had really worked on is, once we have our kind of first single product, we were really looking for other ways that we could take the same mindset, accessibility, comfort, really trying to make the outdoors a better experience. And we looked at other ways in camp that we could, improve people's experience. And so since then, we've launched mattresses, which were always kind of a part of the system, but in the early days, we didn't have one. And again, we took a product that was already out there. Thermarest makes some of the best, sleeping pads there are. And we looked at ways that it could be made better. We had a little bit of insight because Mike used to run Thermarest, but still to be able to look at the product and say, Thermarest uses a reflective foil inside of their sleeping pad to make it, a cold weather sleeping pad. It reflects the heat back up. And we just thought, what's a better way to do this? And so we were actually able to find a synthetic insulation that we can sandwich in between the fabrics. And so when the mattress expands, it actually draws that insulation apart and creates a much warmer sleeping pad. And so, it's kind of taking what's out there, just looking at the specific pieces and just figuring out what we can do to improve that. And that product was actually named one of the best winter sleeping pads by Outside Magazine, I think, the year we released it. And so it wasn't just us who recognized that, we had kind of taken a product that's been almost recycled for so long. I mean, there haven't been many innovations in sleeping pads, especially since there's one company that kind of owns that whole market. So to be able to come in and take a fresh look at it and, really just try and make a better product, was the only way that we could get a foothold, in that market segment. And so that's how we've continued, onwards. We're just releasing in a few months here a whole slew of new products. We're going to release a -20-degree bag. It was the same process. We took all these, ultra cold weather sleeping bag designs. We looked at ways we could both integrate our design into it, but also look for ways we can make them better. I just got back from, I guess you could say, a research trip where I spent a lot of time, camping in very cold weather, and so a lot of that information that I got from that, I didn't use a Zenbivy product, but, just seeing what the standard bag out there was, taking it out, using it, and seeing where those kind of pressure points are, where those pain points are, where you get into a place, maybe you push the gear a little further than it needs to go, but then you realize where those pieces are that, it's like they either didn't think it all the way through, or, there's a better way that this can be done, but either way, I'm out here and this is a problem. And so that's, kind of, again, just kind of our process with that. and so we have quite a few products on the horizon that we've kind of just, used that same process, and, hopefully they haven't been released yet, but we hope that, it ends up solving some problems for people and, giving them a better experience.
Cool. Thank you, Mason. And thanks to you both for that insight on kind of the back end of like figuring out how to make this thing, whatever it is. My next question might be a little bit redundant, but I think when I wrote it, I was thinking about like outdoor retailer and, how do you get companies to pick up your product and sell them? So what goes into developing a product for the outdoor industry or getting it like being sold by REI, like you mentioned, Anastasia? What's that kind of process like? We can go back to Anastasia.
So I'm going to say this, and it's going to come across as a little bit woo-woo probably for the group. I have a very different methodology than probably most businesses. And this is just how I personally like to run things, is from a place of a lot of ease and flow. So I have never tried to sell Kula cloth in the 4 years that I have owned it. That's never been my goal, has been like to try and get sales, because I've always felt like when I'm doing that, that I'm focused on a lack of sales, right? And I noticed in the early days of Kula, when I would get maybe like one order a day, if I was lucky, there's this app that you put on your phone. So my website is run by a platform called Shopify. And Shopify is basically this website that helps you set up a store online. And I would remember that I would have a day, right, where I would have 15 sales instead of one sale. And I caught myself one day thinking like, oh, today's a good day, because I had like 15 sales. And all of a sudden I kind of had this like light bulb realization that I was like judging my days or the success of my business based on a number, and not based on a feeling or the number of people that I was impacting in a positive way. And so I shifted my mindset completely. I stopped focusing on trying to get sales, and I started focusing on just trying to bring something good to people and trying to find ways to bring laughter, joy, like fun energy into the world. And what happened when I started doing that is that my sales started to go up. Now, I wasn't trying anymore to get my sales to go up, but what was happening is that the energy that we created around the product was like bringing people into it, because it was focused on something much deeper than I want to get this product out there and take your money. I'll tell you how Kula got into REI. When I started the business a few years ago, I had a whiteboard in my office, and actually I have a whiteboard in the office now, and all the people who work with me, we all put our little like visions for ourselves on this little board. We just write it down. And I took a whiteboard and I wrote on that whiteboard Kula cloth in REI, and that was literally all I did. And I just thought to myself, someday Kula cloth is going to be in REI. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it is going to happen. I'm not going to try to make it happen, because if I try to make it happen, chances are it's not going to happen, right? Like, it's just going to happen in a really natural way. And one day, maybe about 2 years into running Kula Cloth, I got a phone call from my sister, who helps me run the company now. She does all the social media. And the phone call, I pick it up and it's just her screaming. That's it. She's just screaming on the phone. And what she attempts to tell me is that we had gotten an email from a buyer at REI who had written us an email and said, I found your product and I want to find out how to put it into our store. Now, that being said, I think it's really easy to put a store like REI or these other big stores on a pedestal and say, oh, once you're in REI, that's it, you've made it. Well, I sold a lot of Hula Got to REI, but you have to keep in mind that the profit margin on those products is much smaller than it is when people buy it from my website. So having a product in REI, it's not like this instantaneous, like, oh, overnight, like I'm suddenly like, I'm going to go buy my island in Tahiti. No, I didn't do any of that. In fact, it was really scary because all of a sudden I had to scale from buying 1,000 yards of fabric, which is very pricey for me, to suddenly buying thousands of yards of fabric, like literally $60,000 worth of fabric. So to go from spending $10,000 on fabric to spending $60,000 on fabric. And then when these big companies buy products from you, they often have what's called net 60 or net 90 terms, which means that you put out all the cash to make your product. You make your product, you finally ship it to them after you've spent maybe $100,000 to like make all their product, and then they don't pay you for 90 days. So there is this like 6-month lag time of like having to sort of maintain this like crazy cash flow. And it is really intimidating at first. That being said, it's been like, I did it because I was like, I didn't really care too much about like necessarily the notoriety. It was more or less like, this is going to be a really neat experience to like see how this all works, and it's been really fun. Kula Cloth is a really well selling product at REI, and so they love it and they keep buying it. They usually buy, I think this past year they bought around 36,000 of them to sell. So when you go from maybe selling 36,000 Kulas a year to suddenly adding one order that is 36,000 Kulas, and then you still have to make the other 36,000 or more, it's like a huge learning curve to figure out, like, how do I produce this much stuff? How do I get all this out there? And it's been a fun challenge for me to figure that out. I have no salespeople who work for Hula Got. So all of our wholesale accounts literally come to us. I don't, some outdoor gear companies do have salespeople, but we have none. And I mean, just today, I think I saw in our email like 5 different requests for wholesale orders. So it's one of those things where if you put your focus on like putting out this like good energy out there, then you can really trust that it's going to like come back and find you. And it's a lot of work to have to go out there and get customers and like find them. And so I think your time is so much better spent like trying to tap into different audiences who can help you do that work, right? Like you tap into an audience that gets really passionate and loves your product, they're going to go speak to their outdoor gear company and say, why aren't you selling Kula Cloth? And that's how a lot of our wholesale customers have come to us, is through just word of mouth and organic growth. Like true, I think we've spent like maybe $1,000 on advertising, like almost none. It's really, really cool. So I again, I hope that this, at least the story of Kula, like makes the idea of like creating a product and getting it out there seem accessible to people. And you can get innovative and find fun ways with social media to get people to naturally share what you're doing, not because you're trying to like trick them into doing it, but because you're really creating something that's fun and that makes people feel seen in some way.
Thank you so much, Anastasia.
Yeah.
It's very inspiring to listen to your story, and thanks for sharing it with the students.
Oh, my pleasure.
But cool. Okay, we'll jump back over to Mason, and I like too that y'all have different products, so the approach is totally different. So it's awesome to hear both both sides. So Mason, what in terms of creating and developing a product for the outdoor industry, what has been kind of your journey of maybe not getting into stores or trying to get into stores, or just selling it in that way?
Yeah, so we actually also take a pretty unusual approach to kind of the entire market. One of the first goals of our brand was actually to try and not do any retail stores, and that's something that we've kept to this day. You know, it's partially because of the reason, you know, you have to take kind of a you know, a cut in terms of giving them their you know, their retail price, but also, you know, we wanted to make sure that because our product is slightly more complicated, that we were able to give people a direct line back to us. And so if they purchase their product from us, they know where to find us. They probably talk to Kylie, who's our awesome customer service person, you know, and so we really try and have as much of a just human interaction with people as possible, so that they know that they can, you know, ask us questions, or if they don't have a good experience with it, they know that they can come to us and, you know, tell us why, and any way that we can help resolve that. So that's another reason that we've never tried to get into retail stores. But the last reason is, you know, kind of just because of the way that the industry works within the US. So because we have one main outdoor retailer, you know, basically across the country, REI is kind of it. And so the one thing REI does is they do provide a lot of access to great gear. They buy from a lot of great companies, but there's not a ton of room for innovation from there. They get to choose, you know, basically the style of tents that they buy. A lot of the tents that are created, you know, and sold in the US are created that way because that's what REI is looking for when they purchase tents. And so that's kind of the same across the board for sleeping pads, sleeping bags, you know, certain clothing, you know, and other certain products. And so, you know, obviously with us kind of taking the sleeping bag and throwing the design out the window and trying something new, we didn't fit into that mold. And we could have probably pushed it. You know, my boss knows people there, and, you know, he's worked in the industry forever, but we decided just, we didn't want to, you know, kind of try and push something down their throats that they weren't going to, you know, really be behind, and that they weren't going to try and, you know, put on a similar, you know, placing as a different sleeping bag. You know, and so that's one thing that we've really taken into account. So we have done all of our sales direct to consumer. We've only ever run online. We also do a lot of our stuff word of mouth. The one thing that we have run into, and especially in the past few years, is that we are finding it more and more difficult to sell internationally because of shipping and all this other stuff. And so within the past year is the first time that we've actually started to look for retailers, but we're only currently looking for retailers in countries that, you know, are far away. So we're exploring retailers in Australia and New Zealand. We currently have a few retailers in South Korea, I believe we have them. And then in Japan, we have, I believe, one or two. And then we just partnered with a retailer in Norway. And so those are kind of places where it's really difficult to ship our product. You know, the customer has to pay extra dues when they receive the item, you know, and so it kind of creates a lot of friction, you know, when we're trying to sell internationally. And so we've tried to resolve that in the best way that we can. And we, you know, we just have to at some point recognize that, you know, we won't have that direct line to customers. We won't have that interaction directly with them. But, you know, if it continues the goal of, you know, making people have a better experience outdoors, you know, we think that that's worth it. But yeah, I mean, kind of that's how we operate, and it's a very non-traditional model. We've never attempted to, or made a push to be in any retail stores in the US. And so far it's been successful. And to my knowledge, I think we're the only outdoor company that has gone that path. So that's our experience with it.
Cool. That's awesome to hear. I feel like I'm learning so much about things that I just, go by and, and have, but don't know what's going the back end of all that. So thank y'all for sharing. Okay, we're at like 4:45. So I want to ask one more question and then we'll open it up to the audience to see if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask y'all. But I did want to ask you, because you both have kind of touched on it a little bit, like how sustainability plays in to your product development philosophy. Anastasia, you mentioned that's like the whole reason that you created it, because you were seeing all this trash. So just wanted to touch on that before we do the Q&A. So Anastasia, I'll throw it back over to you.
Yeah, so the whole idea of Kula cloth, of course, is like a low waste product. And I've always sort of thought of Kula as like a gateway, hopefully, for people into other ways that they could reduce waste. That being said, when you are creating a product, especially like a textile product, there can be a lot of waste produced in that process as well. So I think you need to look at all parts of how you're making your product and make sure that you're using, dyes that are not toxic, or like our lamination process, instead of using chemicals to bond these, it's using heat. We're in the process right now of hopefully transitioning over to like 100% recycled fabric. The product itself is recyclable. So like you can take this to a fabric recycling location at the end of its life cycle and actually sort of complete that circle. The other thing that I will say is that as a new company, it can be challenging, because when you first start out and you have 0 customers, you can't purchase mass quantities of fabric. Like, I think about some of the mega outdoor companies like Arc'teryx, or, some of these huge companies, when they're buying their fabrics, they are buying them in such large quantities that I can't even fathom how much fabric they're purchasing, right? Like they're supplying fabric to clothing all over the world. Whereas, I, in the very beginning, was buying like 50 yards was like the most I could afford. And so what's really important to keep in mind is that some of these like sustainable fabrics, or like the eco-friendly fabrics, first off, where are they produced? And some of them have extremely high minimum orders. And so it is difficult, especially in the beginning, sometimes to like get access to some of those like more sustainably produced products. So you have to like shift a little bit of your focus to, where am I getting this manufactured? Kula is manufactured in the United States because it's such a simple product. But like Mason's talking about a much, like vastly more complex product than Kula cloth. Like there are no factories, or maybe one, like Enlightened Equipment potentially, but they have their own product. But there's no factories in the United States that really have the capability to affordably produce a technical outdoor product at the quality level that would be an affordable price point. If Zenbivy was made in the US, it'd probably be like a $4,000 sleeping bag. And so like, but for me, this does not cost me $4,000 to make. Now I could send it somewhere else and have it made probably for cheaper than what I pay for it. But that's a way that I can like offset the fact that maybe I can't buy, 3 billion yards of fabric that was hand foraged. but I could have my product made in the US. And so it's all about, doing the best you can where you are and going easy on yourself. Like, you don't have to be perfect, but you can try your best to make good choices. And as time passes and you're making more and more products, you get more and more access to things that can make your product more sustainable.
Cool. Thanks for that, Anastasia. Okay, what about you, Mason?
Yeah, so I mean, I would definitely have to, just echo a lot of what Anastasia said. How you source materials is such a huge piece. And then there's also, you have to, keep in mind that a lot of this stuff has to even be shipped within the areas that they're produced. And so there's just so many externalities, with each product. Our sleeping bag has probably 100 different components to it. And so we have, the little clips are made somewhere else. I don't even know where our little clips are made, but all of these pieces come from different places. So as a small company, there's a large cost to really being, brass tacks about everything, and, tracking every single detail, and, making sure that everything is exactly how we would want it to be ideally. And so, but with that being said, we do as well try and be as responsible as possible. We try and use fabrics that are already dyed and left over from other projects to make our runs of sleeping bags sometimes, because A, it's cheaper, but B, that material is either going to go to waste, or it's just going to not be effectively used. And so a lot of times we make our color decisions based on what they already have dyed. And because we are, compared to a big outdoor company, we are very small. And so we can basically buy the scrap from these other companies' runs and, work that into ours. Aside from that, we try and source our down responsibly, where we source RDS certified down. We try and make our products durable. That's something that we see as being a big key to sustainability. Most quilt manufacturers out there make their quilts with 10D fabrics, which is a very, very thin fabric, and it'll catch on everything. It'll rip, pretty readily, and you almost have to baby it to keep it in good condition. And so one of the things that we did when designing our product is we said, the fabric is somewhere we could cut weight, but that's not somewhere we're willing to, give any ground on, because we want to maintain durability. We want people to be able to use this for, a long time and not have to go buy another one. And so even though we could have been, in the quilt category, weight of your product is extremely important. And so, for us to say, we're not going to play that game, and that we just want a product that people love and that, they can use forever, we took that step back and we said that, like, this ultralight thing has just gone too far. And so, it's kind of those types of things that those types of decisions that we make in sustainability. Unfortunately, we're not able to, have fully recycled fabric yet, or things like that, or have our components made out of, recycled plastic or anything like that. Although there are really good, there's really cool things being done in that area. A lot of companies are, that we would source fabric from are, producing and selling in lower order quantities these awesome recycled fabrics. So it's definitely opening up, and we want to take those steps as soon as possible. But as a relatively smaller company, it's sometimes difficult to pull out all the stops and make the perfect sustainable product that you would ideally want to be selling. And so that's kind of our journey with sustainability. We do the best that we can, and we hope to just build a product that people can use for a long time. So they're not going to be, kind of just going through outdoor gear every year.
Cool. Thanks, Mason. Okay, with our last 5 minutes, I want to see if any of the students or people in the audience have any questions. So you could either put it in the chat or you can say it out loud, but I'll give some time for that. Okay, there's a question already. Okay, this one's for Anastasia. What is the story behind the hand-forged sustainable Kula cloth display branch?
So that's a really funny question. So that's actually, it's a joke. So 99% of what we do with Kula cloth is have fun and joke. And one of my sister's friends, as a joke, made this design for like a super high-end Kula cloth for premium urinators. And I wrote this like, I don't know if anybody remembers doing like quizzes back in the day. Like, okay, I'm dating myself here, but back in the day, you'd get like Teen Magazine and you'd take this dumb quiz and you'd be like, what type of a dater are you, or whatever. Well, I made up a quiz and it was like, what type of a urinator are you? And I had this whole list of them. And so my sister's friend designed what she called the Kula, and it has a U with the umlaut over top of it, and it was supposed to be this like super high-end Kula cloth, and I listed it on our website for $100,000. It's still there. So if you go to the Kula cloth website, you will see one Kula cloth for $100,000. You can legitimately purchase it. I'm fully prepared to give that person a refund in case they buy it by accident. And then we just had this funny idea that it needed to be displayed on a display branch. And so I went into my backyard, found a branch, took a picture of it, and listed it on the website for $3,800. And so if you're really bored tonight and want a good laugh, go to our website, find the branch, find the premium Kula, and just read the reviews because they are like priceless. People have actually gone in there and like written reviews of these products. We've never sold one of them. But it's all about just like having fun. Yeah, the reviews are fantastic. I think the display branch, you can't see it, but it was actually laying on my island in my kitchen for whatever reason. And just before this call, my husband, he was like, I'm going to take the display branch out of the kitchen. So I still have it.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
Are there any other questions from our audience?
I'll ask a question here. Anastasia in particular, how did you handle, because I think you're probably the first mover to the market, and I just looked on Amazon, like, did you use intellectual property protection? And how did you hire an attorney when you first developed your product, or could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I hired a trademark attorney. So the name Kula Cloth itself is trademarked. And I talked to some patent attorneys, and all of them, they sort of told me they're like, the use of antimicrobial fabric for the purpose of hygiene, it's not surprising, right? Like, and so I talked to two different attorneys, and both of them said, look, you're in a unique position where you have the opportunity to become the Kleenex or the Q-tip, right, of cotton swabs, or the Starbucks of coffee. And so what you need to put your focus on is just getting that brand name recognition out there and just building your brand. Like, focus on building your brand. You're going to have copycats show up. It's literally like whack-a-mole, trying to like get rid of these people. And so I have only ever reached out to one person. There was a woman on Etsy, and actually I was so flattered by this because she actually had listed her product as a Kula cloth. Like, the brand has that much brand recognition that it's like You know, a neck gaiter, everybody calls it a buff. Well, Buff is actually the brand. It's not a buff. And this lady, there's so much brand recognition that the word Kula cloth just became a noun for pea cloth. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so flattered. I feel really bad, but I still have to like email this lady and just say, hey, like you can't call it a Kula cloth. You could say it's a pea cloth. And she was really nice about it. I am a person who tends to focus more on like this notion and idea of, as corny as this sounds, the abundance of all things. And if you spend a lot of time focusing on like this idea of competition and that these people are like taking something from me, it ends up like causing a lot of stress in your business and like trying to get rid of these people. And I always have to come back to like thinking about Nike and Reebok, right? Like these mega billion-dollar companies. I mean, Nike makes what, like 21 million pairs of shoes a year, something crazy like that. And then Reebok and Adidas and Puma and, you know, all these companies are doing so well. And so I look at some of these other companies now who are making pea cloths, and I'm like, oh, there's probably room for all of us here. um, and so I would highly encourage anybody, if you want to design a pea cloth and get into the pea cloth business, and you see yourself talking to people about peeing for the rest of your life, I say go for it.
That's awesome. I wish we had more time because these conversations are very, very interesting, and I feel like so helpful for the students and myself and Peggy. But we are at the end of our time. So I want to thank y'all so much for taking the hour to speak with us. And it's been really, really awesome to hear from both of you about your products and your story in general about, you know, what you're doing with life and working in the outdoor industry. Is hopefully where our students want to be one day. If not, that's okay too. But seeing that there's awesome people doing this stuff and willing to share is really encouraging. So thank you guys so much. And is there anything that either of you want to add before we end?
I did just put my email address in the chat. It's just anastasia@kulacloth.com. So if anybody thinks of a question or something like that, you can find me there. You can also find us on social media if you want to. Our social media is a little bit crazy, so fair warning. There's a lot of dancing and cats. But yeah, I just encourage anybody who has an idea for a product, or if you want to work in the outdoor industry, like listen to how you are talking about what you want to do to yourself, and try to notice if you are the one imposing the limits on yourself, because that's what I did for most of my life. Like when I look back at like all the things that stopped me from following my dreams, it was all me, right? It was things that I was telling myself about how the world was, and it wasn't until I could let those go and be open to ideas and focused on like, I don't know, just having fun and not needing to know all the answers, that the answers suddenly sort of came and found me. And I left my job to do this, and it was really scary to do that. And I wish I could go back to myself on the day that I left my job and just say, like, you have no idea how good it's going to be. So I just would really encourage people to follow your heart without needing to know any of the answers.
Yeah, and I guess I would just second that. I mean, I have no real background in any of this. I went to school for marketing, but I dropped out. And, you know, so product design was never something that I had planned on or intended to do, but it's something that I kind of tapped into. It was tangential to my job. And, you know, I kind of started dipping my toes in, and, you know, really loved just the whole scene and learning about all the different, you know, pieces and all the possibilities. You know, the further you dig into it, the more you see is possible. you know, just the resources out there, the people that you meet. You know, one of the best things about this whole experience has just been, you know, getting excited about something, or, you know, like a design or a product, or, you know, even just the outdoors, and then meeting people who share that same excitement and just want to talk about, you know, whatever, like random little detail, you know, like fabrics or something, and you find somebody who wants to just talk about like different types of fabrics. And, you know, so those types of people are just like the most fun, and it's been kind of the biggest, you know, joy of the whole process. You know, and that being said, you know, like anybody can kind of do this. As I said, I don't have any, you know, real trained experience in this, but, you know, I have ideas, and, you know, I can talk to people, and, you know, so I'm just kind of leaning into it and following it to whatever end it goes to. So that'd be what I'd end on, is, you know, just if you have something you want to do, kind of jump into it, and find the people, like Anastasia said, you know, the people are out there who are going to be just as excited and, you know, cheer you on as well. So, you know, just make the leap and do it.
I'm so grateful to both of you. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, and I'm excited that we got to do this and have this for the students. So again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And